And thank you to ILMEA. We are honored to be able to be here today to talk about this. And, my guess is in the last 4 months, you've heard the term SEL more than you have in your entire lifetime. And there's a really good reason. It's because our students and ourselves, we're under the challenges of a lifetime. And we're grasping for answers. But the big question is, how do we make it musical? And how do we embed it in a way that it reaches all of our students? So enter this panel, and folks, you're in for a treat. I'm talking a lot about SEL, but this is the Rockstar panel. We're going to be joined by Urel Lashley from University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's going to be able to talk about this from a really unique position in terms of the work that he's doing there from a culturally responsive lens. We're going to be able to talk to Elise Hackle, who's going to talk to us about how do we take SEL and make it applicable and make it accessible for all of our students. We have a principal from the state of Ohio, Mike Nesler, who's going to be joining us. And what makes Mike really, really unique is he's a musician. He's the tenor of the Corps, which is an international barbershop quartet finalist. We're going to be joined by Bobby Olson, who's a choir director here in Round Lake in Illinois, who does this expertly in his classroom. And from the pep talk he just gave the panel, we're going to be joined by Javier Payano, and you are in for such a treat. He talks about human values and the love that we need to have for our students in such a unique and powerful way. But the question that we need to start with is, this face came into our classrooms before the pandemic, and we are going to see this face in an alarming rate once we get back to school in the fall. And I don't have a crystal ball. This time today is not about saying whether we're going to be remote, whether we're going to be in person. This is about tackling our challenges no matter what modality we're in. And the big question we need to ask ourselves is, can this person learn effectively? And I hope every single person on this call right now is saying, absolutely not. This person absolutely cannot learn effectively. And the reason is that we are all undergoing trauma. We are all experiencing stress in a new and unique way. And when that happens, we cannot assimilate knowledge the way that we once could. This fall, Maslow before Bloom. We have to take care of our students' social and emotional challenges, their basic human needs, if we are going to have any hope, if we're going to have any hope of having any meaningful teaching and learning happening in the music classroom, in schools. Social and emotional challenges first, for us to be able to get to a place of meaningful teaching and learning. And the reason is, right now, everybody's living in physiological needs. That is the world we're living in. Nobody is getting out of safety needs. Nobody is having their safety needs met, which means the top part of Maslow is off the table. We can't even get to Bloom yet. We have to take care of social and emotional needs first. Now, the challenge is, in education, for those of us who have been around the block a few times, we like extremes. We have gone so far in the direction of testing, of standardization, no child left behind, or no child left in band, as I like to call it, when we get so far over here in this corner that we were starting to build some steam. And we were starting to hear social and emotional learning. We were starting to hear trauma informed. We were starting to hear those terms. Well, what happened? We hit a pandemic, and it's going to shoot social and emotional learning and student first approach as far as it can go in the other direction. But you know what, folks? That's not good either, because it's our job to be music teachers, that we need to be able to capitalize on musicianship, capitalize on music in what we do, to reach our students socially and emotionally. This fall needs before notes. This fall is not the time to say, my wind ensemble was playing a grade 4. This fall, we're going to go to a grade 5. This isn't the time to say, I'm going to push my students to the next level musically. There's going to be a time for that. This fall needs before notes. At its simplest, for those who are still kind of wrapping their heads around what is SEL, it's a proactive approach that gives us the skills to respond to a challenge instead of reacting. We see so much reaction happening right now in our world, and social and emotional learning allows us to respond. And put another way, it's preventative mental health care. That if we are building skills, think of it as a sandwich. We're the bottom bun. We're the bottom bun of a sandwich. These skills are going to help our students be more self-aware, socially aware, and to make good decisions. And then We can put sandwich material on it, whatever you like, it's fine. Once we put that on there, that's going to have challenge. That's going to have life. That's going to have learning. It's going to have school. It's going to have home. It's going to have pandemic. It's going to have all of that. At that point, we need a top bun. And that top bun is our mental health professionals. There are counselors. There are psychologists. There are social workers. We need to know that we are not counselors. But this fall, we're going to see a lot of extreme behaviors. We're going to see a lot of behaviors that are manifesting themselves as anger, that are manifesting themselves as frustration, that's going to manifest themselves as students being off task. But at its heart, those bad choices are not bad choices. They are a cry for help. And if we approach our students and their behavior with that in mind, we're going to approach it from a point of empathy. We're going to approach it from a point of growth and not punishment. Social and emotional learning has been around for a long time. It's been around since 1994 was when we first heard the term. And like I said, it's been having a lot of energy coming up, but that pandemic's putting this huge microscope right on top of it and saying, this is important. We need to do this. But guess what, folks? SEL is going to be around for a long time after. It's going to be around for a while because at its heart, it's about helping our kids succeed in life. Here's your 40,000-foot view definition of SEL. So I'll give you a second just to scan it. But as we look at this, there are three really critical points that I want to make. One, it's a skill set. Just as we teach our students musical skills, our kids know how to practice. We know how to teach our kids how to practice, right? SEL is no different. It's a skill set that we can teach our students how to get better at. Think about it. If we get better at something, it's because we've practiced. But if we stop practicing, it gets worse. Same thing true with SEL. It's unifying. It's not about bullying. It's not about drugs. It's not about relationship. It's about all of that. Because it's such a broad umbrella, it helps our students in whatever challenges that they're facing. At its heart, it can be divided into three key components of self, others, and decisions. Self, can I tell you how I'm feeling, why I'm feeling it? Others, can I approach the world with empathy to appreciate diversity? And then, can I make good decisions? You know, this is sequential. So I kind of equate it to how do we teach music? Self, foundational, is rhythm. It is how it's pulse. It's understanding the heartbeat of the music. And then once we reach that point, then we can understand how those rhythms can move up and down. And that's our melody. Others is pitch. And then only when we have those two elements in place can we move on to tunes, to move on to songs. We are in a special position in music because we have low-lying fruit that we can grab off the tree and say, this is SEL to our students. Why? Because we have easy connections. We connect kids to each other. We connect music to their lives. We see our students more than any other teachers in the school. We see them year after year after year. Some of our teachers who are on this call see their kids for 12 consecutive years. It's called developmental relationships. With those relationships, you are in the perfect position to capitalize on all of these different connections. Repertoire. Our music has heart. When we're thinking about what we're going to teach our students, it has to start with how is it going to connect to our students' lives. Right now, we're all concerned about being culturally responsive. Well, what does that mean? How does the music that our students have outside of their lives connect with the music that we're trying to teach them inside our classrooms? And then experiences. We don't just talk about doing music, we do music. This is what I think a lot of people are challenged with this all is, how do I do this without concerts, without engaging in ways that I'm used to? We'll talk a little bit about that tonight too. And then reflection. John Dewey said, we don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. Every single thing we do in the music classroom should be accompanied by reflection and not just, hey, how did the concert go? Yeah, that's tail end reflection, important. But from the beginning, what do you think about this process? What do you think about what we're about to start? How are you going to make this personal? And then when we're in the middle of the process, what's going well, what's not going well? What are your strengths? What are your needs? How does this meld onto that? And then, of course, reflecting back. One of the founding fathers of social and emotional learning had this to say: I believe everyone will soon come to realize that our arts educators are the secret weapon to implementation of social and emotional learning in our schools. That is from a non-musician. That is from a non-artist. If the social and emotional learning community is starting to say, hey, these guys got it figured out, we have the opportunity. I am so honored today to be able to welcome Urel Lashley to our panel from just a little bit north of us, from Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin-Madison. His work that he's doing there is incredibly powerful, and I'm so thankful that he's going to be able to take over. Urel, please join us, and I'll go ahead and forward the slides. Just give me the nod.
All right. Thanks so much. Good evening to everybody. Thanks so much for including me, Scott, and thanks so much to ILMEA. Yeah, so Scott did a lovely job of sort of giving us a very basic understanding of sort of what SEL is. And, you know, it's important to realize that these are life skills, right? And that's what we used to call it pre-SEL. I always joke with people about that this is not new, but we like the practice of redefining things to give them life again. But for many of us who are music educators, this was something that we always thought about. So my job now will be to just talk a little bit about how this can look and how we start to actually do some of what Scott has set us up to think about. And one of the ways I like to think about it is that as we think about social and emotional learning, we need to first focus on how do we, going back to what all healthy classrooms need and the elements of any healthy classroom. As you can see here, we obviously always need a safe and respectful environment. And when we say that, we mean not just physically safe, but also emotionally safe, because we know that that learning is a risky proposition for most of us, and especially for students who struggle. We need caring and trusting relationships, right? Both between students themselves and also teacher to student and among colleagues. We need high and clear expectations. So folks need to know sort of what's expected of them and what they can expect of us. And when I say this, I don't think this is top down, but that students are making their expectations clearly known as well. And we give them the tools to be able to do that. Opportunities for meaningful contribution and ownership, right? We used to think that if you just assigned a few line leaders that was good enough. Well, if we really get, I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into culturally relevant teaching later, but part of that is thinking critically and training and supporting students and getting them opportunities to practice thinking critically, which is a much more deep level of ownership of their own educational possibilities and educational process. And then consistency and continuity we need. Obviously, we want to make sure that learners know what to expect, and that things sort of make sense and can be, expectations are clear for them every day as they show up, but also that we need to be able to be flexible, right, and adapt. And we show up with one lesson and students show us they need something else, we got to be willing to give that to them. And then finally, developing relationships and caring and trusting relationships is also to know, sort of recognize the triggers that students may have and that may sometimes come out as disruptive behavior, which gets back to the point that Scott was making about not misunderstanding a cry for help, and knowing the difference between when a bad choice is in fact a cry for help. And warmed my heart to hear him say that, because that's something I've been talking about for the last 20 years. So I'm glad that that's sort of a way that we're really thinking about it. All right, so as we move to the next slide, I want to start with just thinking about some questions that we can ask ourselves. And this was actually the process that I went through. I teach a program called Drum Power that teaches life skills through West African, Afro-Cuban, Afro-Brazilian percussion. I've been doing that since 2001. It started in New York City, there up in Harlem, and I brought it to Madison, Wisconsin in 2010. I'm about 3,800 kids into doing this that I personally worked with. And I'm also an educational psychologist, so that's sort of part of how I'll come at this. But I came in the back door to the whole PhD thing because I was interested in understanding how programs like Drum Power and other just musically focused educational programs affected and impacted kids at the cognitive developmental level. and I wanted to be able to sort of propose my own hypotheses around those things. So one of the things that I started to do was to ask some key questions. What can you get out of participating in music making that will help in life? And for me in New York, I was becoming a professional percussionist and gigging and doing all that, but started to miss working with young people and started to think, how could I share some of what I was getting with them? And then the second question is, how might one teach music making alongside those things simultaneously? So with drumming, I knew that there was things we learned around having to focus and the old definition of discipline, right? Which used to mean a practice that was effortful and that was a process that we engaged in over time towards some developmental goal, right? Not, but I always ask kids, what does discipline mean to you? And it's interesting the responses they get. But we'll get into more of that in the next slide. So you can kind of work backward. All right. So for me, these are the pillars of power for drum power, which are our social emotional learning goals for class. And one of the things I try to help educators do is to think about your classroom core values, those words that are often on the wall that say they govern our behaviors and also our choices, but also our hopes and dreams, that those actually are synonymous with social and emotional learning, and that you don't have two different sets of stuff, because we know that the more we give students, the harder it is to sort of focus in, and that less is definitely more. So for me, I settled on three. Discipline we define as using my energy for good things. And actually, I say I borrowed, but I stole that definition from a student who I had early in drum power, who told me that his sensei had used this definition that for his karate class. And I said that's excellent. And so you see, it's very broad. Same with community, is supporting our own learning and the learning of fellow students. So that's very educationally focused. And then leadership is doing the right thing, even if I have to do it by myself, and especially when no one is watching, right? So these are all also full of action. So I think for good SEL, it's about applied learning and practice, and creating an atmosphere where that practice can occur and occurs on a regular basis, and students begin to expect it and also see the value of what it brings to their lives as things that they actually experience and feel. And we can do that through music. So moving to the next slide, I think there are some initial steps that is helpful to just think about. So as I alluded to, you have to first try and identify what are the core values or social emotional learning skills and outcomes that you think live in your practice. If that's from a band teacher, that might be one thing. If that's someone like me who does something that's focused on a specific set of cultural traditions, that might be another thing. But you first have to identify them. And then you have to also translate them in the language that makes sense for young people, right? Kids don't talk about self-awareness or social awareness, right? They talk about getting along with friends or feeling good about relationships, sometimes, but we have to find language that makes that real to them, and also then activities and behaviors that are real to them. Then we need to determine the key cultural elements, philosophy, strategies, and teacher-student behaviors that we're going to connect to SEL and use to practice it. And then we start to weave the actual practice into classroom systems and routines, right? And try to reinforce them in academic lessons. For me, that sometimes looks like I'm going to teach maybe them to play tone slapping bass on the djembe, and we'll talk about how do we need to use discipline to do that specific lesson itself, and what elements of community or ensemble work are going to look like for that specific lesson. Then we also build relationships with students to know what will spark their vitality, right? Which is, again, back to building relationships, important in any class. And then we create meaningful measures to try to figure out whether these outcomes are happening or not. And that's actually one of the reasons I went and got a PhD, was I was hoping that I could do that so that other teachers didn't have to. So one of the things I like to do is sort of turnkey some of the strategies and thoughts around how you actually measure some of this stuff. So if you have questions about that, you can throw those in the chat. Maybe we'll get to it later. And finally, fail until you succeed. I say start a garage band, right? we have these programs now like The Voice and American Idol that reinforce in our young people that you're a finished product and that kids are born as finished products without any real scaffolding or developmental process of how they get from not knowing anything to being really good at something. And starting a garage band, we used to like, you would get together with your friends and, pardon my French, you would suck at the beginning and you would just keep playing until that wasn't true anymore, right? And we had that as the expected example. Well, we've kind of shifted from that. So as we move on to the next slide, good SEL is a reflection-driven process, as Scott said. And I think this flowchart sort of lays that out for us. If we think about subject-specific skills, in my case, those would be drumming skills. And then we think about social emotional skills. We bring those together and we consider where those would live as realities and experience things for students. And we wind up with strong and relevant teaching and pedagogy. And then finally, as we move to the last slide, one starting point is really just to look at your own practice and say, what are the social and emotional skills that I teach? What are the tasks or behaviors that would require students to use them in my class? How would I assess them? What data do I need? And you can think about whether that's quantitative or qualitative, but I'm always a big fan of teachers being able to just figure out the data that's meaningful to them, and that influences you to become better at what you do and not have to default to what you're given, even though I know that's not a choice a lot of us can make. So at that point, that was what I had as far as introduction, and I'll invite Scott back in.
Urel Rockstar, thank you so much, my friend. Absolutely gave us a different perspective to think about this. Thank you so much. I want to just spend just 2 seconds before we start to get into the meat of why we're here, and that's to hear from this fantastic panel. Talk about a few new resources that are available just so you can come with us on this journey. The first is a Facebook group that we've created to put all of our resources on as they're coming out. So feel free to join that. The second thing is a brand new video podcast series that I'm doing where I'm interviewing people from the field, connecting those dots explicitly from the music to the composers to the teachers. Just to kind of whet your appetite a little bit, our next 3 guests on this series are going to be Omar Thomas, Jim Stevenson from here in Illinois, and John Feierabend. So we're really trying to cast this net really, really wide. If you have suggestions on who you would like to see on this series, please shoot me an email. And with that, folks, we're going to jump us into our time with the panel. So if I could ask the panel all to turn on your videos and join me, we're going to start off thinking very, very broadly and talking a little bit about exactly where Urel sort of led us just now. About for social and emotional learning to be meaningful for our students, it has to be embedded in curriculum. We learned that a long time ago in a report called the Aspen Report, that for social and emotional learning to be beneficial and relevant, it has to be embedded in our curriculum. It cannot be a standalone activity. So there are 2 teachers who have joined us today who do this expertly, who do this absolutely brilliantly. And I'm going to invite Bobby Olson from Round Lake High School to kind of kick us off right now and talk to us a little bit about how he engages his students in a musical, social, and emotional learning way. Bobby?
Thanks, Scott. So I teach choir at Round Lake High School, and about 4 or 5 years ago, I was starting to feel overwhelmed with the needs that I was seeing for my students and didn't know how to deal with the anxiety and depression that I was seeing from kids. Something that made me feel better is knowing that SEL is targeting about 80% of our kids, a general population. The kids with severe anxiety or depression, we need to be working with our counselors. And so, first of all, SEL does not solve the most intense problems. But then as I was starting to learn about SEL, I find it starts with self-awareness, and kids are really good at talking about themselves and thinking about themselves. And so that as we started using SEL activities in the choral classroom, I would start with things like playing a piece and asking kids how the emotions that they were experiencing were caused by the music, and starting to tie that there's a causation between some outward source and what they're feeling. And I really view SEL as starting with social awareness, starting with self-awareness, building to social awareness, and then making decisions. Something that we might see coming up is people dividing SEL from instruction and just wanting to plug in an activity and focusing on better regulation. But I think we want to teach through our music, which we're experiencing in picking, and then find parts of the music that kids can connect to learn more about themselves.
Perfect, Bobby. Thank you so much. So we're going to come back and we're going to talk about how you engage them in some specifics in a little bit. We're going to transition to Javier, who's going to talk to us a little bit about how he does it in his classroom. And now, Javier, I know that your cup of tea and what you are brilliant at is talking about human values. And I think there are so many people, some people on this call right now who are thinking, I do this, but I really don't call it social emotional learning. I think this is a journey that you've been on, Javier, is that your entry point wasn't calling it SEL, but the more we looked at it together, pretty similar. So Javier, can you talk about how you make musical social emotional learning in your classroom?
Absolutely. I think that there are a lot of similarities between education and human values and SEL, namely in them being skills that we can learn in terms of the social awareness, personal awareness, and then decision making. There are a couple of differences, I think, but there is tons of overlap. I just want to give a very brief definition of human values being a universal character education program. And just a couple core tenets, and I just want to give a shout out to Yorel for talking about these values. And I think I agree with you, Scott, in saying that a lot of us do this already, but we may not call it SEL, we may not call it human values. We all have human values, and these are the values that we may or may have not learned around the dinner table with our family, talking about our day, talking about our problems, and then getting this wonderful advice from our family, or our family represents honor, or our family represents service or charity. And we have these human values that are very apparent in our families, and then they're apparent in certain media. I always quote Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as an example of this. And there are these wonderful values, and Yorel talks about 3 of the values that he's chosen, including discipline. So the way that manifests in human values in the program that I do in school is each week I pick a theme of the week, or I call it the value of the week. This week, for example, we're doing patience. And then I tailor my curriculum around that value for that week. So we teach that value to students through 5 different teaching techniques, one being meditation, one being a story, one being the quote of the week. And then especially the one that relates to us is the song of the week. So that would include me choosing a song that can be a song that I found, probably a song from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It could be a popular song that I find on YouTube that the kids like, or it could be a song that we compose together. I'm a high school teacher. I teach orchestra. I teach music for diverse learners, and I teach a ukulele class. So it's a pretty accessible way to teach these values. So it's really about choosing that value first that you're trying to choose to teach to your student. But then here's the flip side, and here's where things get interesting for me. 3 tenets of education and human values is 1, to see the good in all of the students. So maybe there's a little kind of dissonance that I feel when we say we're going to teach to the students or teach the values to the students. What I want to think is that all of these positive human values already exist within every single student. And all we're doing is inspiring that value to blossom and come out of the student with their decision makings, with their interactions with other people, and with the way that they see themselves as the skills that you outline in your work, Scott. The other thing is teaching kids to connect with their inner wisdom. We're talking about teaching students how to think critically. So also this understanding that children have a lot of wisdom and a lot of understanding and a lot of knowledge, especially about the things that they like. So a student-led approach to teaching, right? What do the kids already know, and how do we bring that out and help them connect to their inner wisdom in a way of like being confident in going with their gut and going with their intuition, instead of what we see now is students kind of struggling to make their own decisions because they don't trust themselves. So that can be another outcome of decision making. And then the last thing, and I think the most important thing I want to add to this conversation, is about being the example. So in order, we're talking about SEL, we're talking about all these things and how to teach them to the students, but I want to challenge everyone that we should be doing this SEL work in our own personal lives, that we should be practicing whatever human values that you want to choose to teach students or teach out of the students, let's say, in an educator model, that we need to do the work to help those values blossom within our being. That way, throughout our teaching, we naturally give the example of the students of these are the things that we want you to be. So putting a little bit more of that responsibility on the teacher themselves. So that's kind of the philosophy behind it. And then, yeah, choosing a value each week. Okay, this week we're gonna talk about patience. Okay, so then I will either write a song or I'll find a song. I wrote a song called Patience is the Key. Patience, 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 patience is the key. And have the kids keep it simple. They're playing on the ukulele. Another week was self-compassion. Self-compassion, self-compassion. I always first give love to me. Really short songs, really simple songs, but things that they'll continue to think about throughout their day. You know, especially like, oh, I can't play this B flat scale. Like I'm terrible. No, wait a minute. We sang a song about this. Self-compassion, self-compassion. And in those moments where the students are starting to doubt themselves, they'll remember those lessons that we all learned together and hopefully use that to reinforce all of the good and positive values and SEL skills that we're trying to teach them throughout the year. And imagine doing that week in, week out for 40 weeks. The students really start to blossom, take ownership over their own well-being, taking care of others, and making much better decisions in not just school, but in their entire life.
Thank you so much for that. We're all going to be singing those tunes. And, you know, we have a 3.5-year-old in the house, and Daniel Tiger, you know, that's the Daniel Tiger models. What can we do to have a really quick tune that's going to get in our ear, and we're going to take off from there? Elise, can I tag you really quickly? Because we have Bobby and we have Javier, who are both high school teachers, and you teach our littles. Can you talk a little bit about what this looks like in your classroom?
Absolutely. So the great thing is it's not that different, except that my students have severely diverse needs in the fact that they range from being nonverbal to not being able to have any motor movements. So the way that interacting with music is quite different in my classroom. Now, the biggest thing for me when I was starting to work with my students is that music is so vulnerable. And that's the great thing about it, is that it allows us to connect to people. Once we open up and we feel accepted, we know that those are our people. They've got our back. I can connect with them. I can be with them. But what happens when we're asking our students to be vulnerable and to perform or to do this task, but they don't have a way to access it? Because the way in which we've been taught our whole lives is, this is the way that we sing this song because we sing it. But what if the student can't sing, right? So it's the accommodations, the adaptations and modifications that I do every day. It's the process and how we reach whatever that end goal is. I don't like to say curriculum. I don't like to say content. I like to say purpose. What's the purpose of this lesson? Usually for me, the purpose is, let's do this one music task, but we're all going to do this in our own way. How can I demonstrate this in multiple ways? So for my students, that may be, hey, we're not going to sing this one song. Like, I'm even going off of one of Javier's songs. Maybe my students can play instruments with it. Or maybe I'll have switches that have pre-recorded verses of my voice that they can then jump in or add something to on their own. How can we allow them to connect to the material? How can we allow them to be vulnerable and feel appreciated? And oftentimes, especially when we get to our littles, this is the first time that our kindergartners are seeing somebody that doesn't look exactly like them, that may be flapping in the hallways, that may not be able to walk or talk or communicate. How can we say, not only accept those differences, but appreciate them? How can we have our students understand that that person is different than me, and that's what makes them awesome and unique? So thinking about, yeah, that self-awareness is really important too, and especially for a lot of our younger students, they may not know how they're feeling or know how to put that into words. And that's the cool thing about SEL in the music classroom, is when we're connecting to music, we're giving them the opportunity to say, oh, this song makes me feel like I want to move. I must be connecting to that. That might make me feel something. And then from there, we can start to build about, okay, what does that mean? What does that feeling mean? What does it make me want to do? How do other people feel? Is that the same? And transfer into that others. But the piece about others as well is, how can we have our students recognize that that looks different in other people, that my happiness is not going to look the same. And something that makes me happy is not going to make the person next to me happy. So it's not just accepting that, but it's appreciating it. My ultimate goal is for students to all feel comfortable, safe, and have access to what we're doing. The two big things, I'll get a little special ed in here too, but adaptations and modifications. So modifications is usually like that goal. I'm changing the goal. It's the what. I like to stick to adaptations. And the one icing on the cake of this pandemic is you're all becoming adaptive teachers now, because we have to think outside of the box. We have to think about, okay, I still have this goal, but what's the process going to look like if I'm virtual or if it's hybrid? We have to really think about the different tools to get to that end goal, to get to the purpose. So now we're all being challenged to think about, okay, if a student has a device, if they're lucky enough to have a device, what's that going to look like? If they don't have the device, how can I get them the materials that they need? How can I get them a connection to the song? If they're going to be hybrid, how can I give them an extension so that they can take ownership and really become a producer of what I'm doing? My big focus for virtual learning has been, how can students be producers? And the cool thing is, I won't talk too much about tech, but there's a lot of technology out there that can help you do that. We really have to think about, how can I access this? And the way that I'm going to access it isn't the same way that Scott's going to access it. Maybe Javier wants to sing this song, and maybe another student feels comfortable saying, you know, I came up with this really cool riff in the background that I'd love to play and add to this song. Are they still part of that? Absolutely. Are they still going to remember that riff every time that they're doubting themselves? Absolutely. It's the connections to each other, to the music, and inwardly as well. And that's the big thing that I try to focus on from a young age. So by the time they get to that older stage, they're more confident. They're confident in themselves. They're confident as neighbors, as community members, as people, and they can become accepting, appreciating, and loving community members in our school.
Elise, spot on. And for those of you who have heard either myself or Bob Morrison talk about change the how, not the what this fall, we have to change the how. Guess where that came from? Exactly what you just said, is adapt before we modify. That we can still do what we do in music education. It's just going to have to look different this fall. Elise, I want to keep you on for just a second, if I can. And, you know, as both Uriel and I spoke to, the importance of reflection, the importance of how can we get our students to put themselves into the process and the product. And, you know, my big thing is, well, yes, can you write a paragraph? Yeah, that's beautiful, but kindergartners aren't going to do that. And there certainly are going to be students who have things that they're bringing to the table that are going to inhibit their ability for that to be the best modality. Can you help us brainstorm for just a second about other ways that we could have our students reflect?
Absolutely. So words are just words, right? For me, a lot of times it comes to anything that they can connect to. So if I have students that are, let's say we're listening, I love the song Happy by Pharrell Williams because they all know it, and there's the Minions version and the little kids love that. So let's take that for a second. How can they reflect on how that's making them feel at first, right? So we have some students who can select a word from a word bank. If they're able to read, they may not recognize that in themselves, but if they're given a list of a couple things that helps them narrow it down, well, there's some choices there. That choice making helps them to later then also tie into that decision making of, okay, I know this choice bank, I've seen this before, now we can kind of start to take it away, and eventually they have those choices on their own. For students who can't read, maybe it's images. Maybe just like, I don't know if you've seen the emoji board that Scott's used, but Maybe it's circling the emoji and that's how I feel. Maybe it's taking a video of themselves, having a video of how they're reacting to music and giving them a switch that says, I look like I'm having fun, or I don't look like I'm having fun. They'll know how they look. Just as when we look in the mirror, we can tell I've had a rough day. I can walk by a mirror and say, oh, that was a rough day for me. Giving them the option to see themselves, to view themselves, but also representation of themselves, just as it is for any of us. We need representation. So when we can see other people and we can see, yeah, they look happy, but how does that reflect on me? What does that look like for me? And especially because a lot of our young learners with disabilities are still at that level one, still understanding themselves. They need to be able to see themselves literally in what they're doing, but also envision themselves in what they're doing.
Fantastic. Elise, thank you so much. Mike Nestler, our principal from Ohio. So you have some thoughts on how we can expand and have students from who writing or whatever that looks like. How can we get our students to reflect in different ways?
I'm always with the mute button. We had a couple of students at our school. We are a 5-6 building. We actually have some students who carry around pictures of themselves. So they might not be able to physically, emotionally do that, but they can do that themselves. Or if they're having problems with that self-connecting piece, to be able to, as the teacher in the room, help them self-judge and make that connection to them. So we do that a lot. Another thing that we do is sometimes we just need a minute ourselves to reflect. So every teacher in our building has some kind of self-reflection, self-moment time where they can step out and do that. And our music teachers have kind of been instrumental in helping develop some of the things that happen in those areas.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you. And just on a personal note, for those of you who don't know, Mike knows deep, dark secrets about me. He was my freshman year RA at Bowling Green State University. So you can tap him to hear those deep, dark secrets. Mike, we're going to get to this a little bit deeper later, but your role as a professional musician, how does that play in your view of what musical, social, and emotional learning can look like in your school?
It's really, it really ties in with those connections. With the group that I sing with, we're all about, our goal as a quartet is to connect with people. That's what we base our song selection on. It's what we base the choices we make when we do shows with people and who we're going to affiliate ourselves with. It's all about that connection to that. And as music educators, you have that innate ability already built in. I think, Scott, you were talking about it earlier with you see these kids, we see these kids from 6th grade, some of you, to seniors in high school. Some of you see them from kindergarten all the way to seniors in high school, depending on the size of your district. So you really have this ability to see growth, recognize it, and tell students about it. I think that communication piece, sometimes as adults, we're afraid to step out and have that conversation with the student and really let them know, hey, I'm seeing you making these choices here. This is really awesome. You weren't doing this before. That just pumps that student's self-confidence up and their self-awareness.
Thank you so much. So powerful. I mean, it's almost like, okay, so we have another music educator here, but this is from the viewpoint of an administrator. That's a really important voice for us to hear right now. Anyone else have something to say before we slightly move to another area of our discussion? Okay. So lately, we have been undergoing so many challenges in our country in terms of racial division. And there have been discussions around social and emotional learning that when SEL is misused, it can be used as another form of control. That if we look at self-management and we say, oh, manage your emotion, just suck it up. You don't need to be worried about That's not what SEL is, as I think you've already heard. But social and emotional learning is about putting a microphone in front of every single one of our students and saying your voice matters, and teaching them how to use that voice, and to be able to have a space where every emotion is validated and they are able to wrap their heads around why they're feeling that emotion and how to work through that in a social context. And that goes from everybody. You know, I mean, my starting point for much of what we're talking about now on how we make this musical is that, not to put too fine a point on it, we need to expose our students to music that is by people who don't look like me. And that's the starting point, is that we have diverse music in front of our kids. And then it just explodes from there. And we're going to throw it to the panel, who's going to be able to give us some ideas. Urel, can I start with you, my friend, to talk to us a little bit about how cultural responsivity intersects with social emotional learning?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. I guess I want to start by just one issue of attribution. So when we think about we say culturally responsive teaching, and traditionally that term has been more about language. I think it's now sort of being reframed as being closer to culturally relevant, but we know cultural relevance was laid out by Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings here at Wisconsin, who's now retired. But the key piece of that was that it was more than just sort of a response to or validation of code switching and that sort of thing caught up in linguistics. Was really, really culturally relevant teaching maintains and appreciates culture and uses culture to actually transcend the negative effects of the dominant culture that has, especially on folks who don't represent dominant cultural background. So the idea is that it's not about sort of trying to whitewash differences or to make cultural differences less important, right? It's actually, or to make them less impactful in learning processes, right? So that we can sort of put everybody on an equal playing field. No, it's actually about celebrating difference and letting the differences in culture actually matter. And because to do otherwise is really assimilation, right? And that's not really the goal. So I think, to echo sort of what Javier was saying, cultural appreciation is a human value, right? So if we start there, then I think one way to start with that is to then make central the importance of lineage. One of the things I know in my own practice in terms of teaching West African traditional music, people always, assume that all the Black and Brown students will be very, very engaged with it sort of automatically because it's supposed to represent their cultural heritage. Where I can tell you, I lived overseas in West Africa as a child growing up for a couple of years, and came back and heard every joke in the book about what African Americans thought about Africans. So it's actually culturally stuff that a lot of times folks will run from. So I will say that we need to get away from some of those assumptions and understand that actually the culture sort of assimilation that we've all had in the United States has meant that even folks who are sort of genealogically connected to some of these cultures don't necessarily associate or see themselves in them. But what is powerful is the importance of lineage. And so for me, that's one of the things I look for other teachers to do, and I try to do in my own work. And that is to say, like we learn with West African tradition, they learn that some of these rhythms are coming from the kingdom of Old Mali, and they learn what some of the contributions of those culture have been and how that music has changed over time. And then in an applied setting, get to actually feel the power of what that music is still to this day. And something somewhat magical happens, especially in sort of the meditation part of what we do and the repetition of playing the drum and sort of just making joyful noise and sound together. So I think I heard some of us sort of focusing on the joy piece, but I think to explicitly as teachers connect that to lineage and also the richness of culture is an important and impactful thing. And actually, I won't say it's easy, but it's a fairly simple thing to do, because when you pick a piece of music, it already has inherent in it some cultural background and a deep history. And if we're very thoughtful and reflective about picking music based on that also, and then utilizing those histories to build students up and to reinforce and bring value to traditions that are culturally different than what sometimes students normally will experience, then that takes them a long way. And I feel like actually people always used to think of drum power work, for example, as interventionist work. And they were always saying, well, can you take these kids with the highest referrals in school, and they would always be mostly African American, and Latinx students, and do something productive? And I said, yeah, but we do this for all students. And actually, since we know that the students who you don't think need this are never in classes with the students you do think need this, then we can actually use music to be the level playing field, especially when they're learning something that's culturally different than everything that's around them, where everyone can start together. And you can actually take the students who are used and have proven records of what we consider success, at least academically, and encourage them to figure out how to be leaders in a compassionate, caring way to the students who don't typically experience that in the traditional academic ways. And we'll also see that some of the students for whom that's true will exhibit some aptitude and some deeper connection with a different type of cultural tradition and experience their own leadership opportunities and sort of everything in between. But I think the music work that we do is an excellent place for us to sort of bring lots of different students with different needs and different abilities together. And I think that's actually what cultural relevance is about.
Urel, thank you. We all needed to hear that, and that gave us a lot of things to think about. And the second that you said music is the level playing field, my fingers could not type fast enough so that we had that in the chat. That is something that for those in the back, that certainly that, I just interviewed the band composer Alex Shapiro, and her words were that music can be the portal inward to the heart and the portal outward to the world. And that is exactly what social and emotional learning can do, and so well put. So thank you for that. Elise, you have something that you want to tag on to this.
Yeah, and Ural, thank you so much for bringing that up, because as soon as you were talking about assimilation, immediately in my mind, it reminded me of my students on the autism spectrum, who the first day of school, they're put into interventions and therapies, and they're being taught how to act like their peers, right? They're being assimilated to act like their peers from preschool, from early intervention. And that's not what culturally responsive teaching is. It's how can we, as a group, appreciate each other's collective differences. And for me, the first reason that I realized this was another teacher said to me, I'm so excited to give them a voice. And I thought, they have a voice. You don't get to give them a voice. And so for me, it's not, you're not giving them a voice. How can we change and adapt what we're doing to make space for their voice, especially for students who are not heard because their voices aren't verbal? Behavior is communication. We talk about this all the time. What are they doing to communicate with you? How are they communicating with you? And how can we spotlight that? How can we make those students leaders instead of followers, and trying to assimilate them into the social behaviors that we recognize as society? How can we change as society to appreciate those differences and recognize them? And how can we learn from our peers and our community members? And that's especially, I don't know if anybody's really done work in the neurodiversity movement, but please, if you haven't looked into it, I know a big thing that's been pushed in education is person-first language. And yes, that is important to some people, but that's not important to everybody. And so please know your students, know what they appreciate about themselves, and appreciate that about them. And so that's, if you remember anything about special ed and special learners today, it's not special learners, it's people who identify as people and who they are and what is meaningful to them. And especially our deaf community and our autistic community are really, really taking those words back and taking them in and saying, we're here and we're not going to assimilate into your culture. And they shouldn't have to, because we should appreciate the differences in everybody. So that totally reminded me of that, Urel, and I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Elise, thank you so much for that. And, obviously our world has been in language. And I think many of us are paralyzed to have conversations because we're afraid to say something that might be offensive. And the fact that you're giving us this, not necessarily person first language, but let's ask, what do you want? And really looking at the perspective of the child first and of the communities first to be able to drive that discussion. Very, very powerful. Thank you for that. Bobby, you have something.
Yeah, I agree with everything Elise said, and to also tie into a couple things that Urel and Javier mentioned earlier. I think that if we start by being more aware of what we pick, what repertoire we pick, what activities we do, and being self-aware of what the influences on us have been, we might recognize that what we bring to the table might be just from one musical perspective, right? If we think that Mozart is the end all be all, we miss out on so much music, right? And so becoming self-aware enough to recognize what influences us, what like events are we planning towards, and how does that kind of pigeonhole our activities and our music, I think is a really important first step. So I think being self-aware, and then once you've started on that work, trying to learn more about the music we do pick, not just picking the latest world music piece, but actually learning about the composer and figuring out if it's an authentic representation of a culture, and then doing our best to teach it effectively. And then I think on that, acting in a way that gives our students the like space to share their voice, like Elise was saying. So, I teach at a school that is about 75% Hispanic Latino. And if I pick a piece in Spanish, I should know about how to pronounce Spanish, but I should definitely have a student who's comfortable teach the whole class how to pronounce it, so that they're given both some opportunity, but also a more authentic way to teach and learn the language. So I think it's important for us to know enough to teach with authority, but also know enough to get out of the way and give our students a chance to share what they know, right? Because they know so much, and formulating our activities in a way that gives some structure, but also gives them a chance to share their own perspective. And one example of this, for our winter concerts last year, a lot of our pieces focused on community. And so we just asked a general question like, what is your family or your community traditions around holidays? And that can be anything from, October through December. And it was really eye-opening for me to hear what kids' traditions were, but also for kids to recognize which other students in the class celebrated different holidays the same way they did. And the lights that went on in kids' eyes were really cool. So thanks.
And Bobby, where that resonated with me is, and I'm seeing it in the chat, and it goes back to what Urel started off with, is that give the students the opportunity to be the expert. Give the students the opportunity to be the teachers. My line right now is, we have, especially this fall, when, we can't be expected to be the expert as if we ever were, to be able to dump knowledge. But we need to take a step back so our students can take a step forward. And when we say, I may not be the culture bearer, but there are a lot of culture bearers out there who want to come into our classrooms. And that's one of the beautiful things about remote teaching, is all you need to do is ask. And there are so many people who will jump at the opportunity to say, I'm in, let me help. Let me show you my perspective, my voice. Javier, I had you down. You ready to go?
Oh yeah. I had just so many thoughts and so many comments based on what all the panelists were saying. So I'm going to thank everyone for that. I have a lot to say, so I'm going to try to be brief on this subject. The first thing is that there's a reason we all worship Mozart, and it's because the higher ed music education system has not changed in many, many years. We're still really focused on the big three: choir, band, and orchestra. And while I love all of those, I was in both choir and orchestra in undergrad. I think that there are other kinds of art forms that need to be elevated. So just sharing a little bit of my perspective, I was in a rock band, you know, as Yorel alluded to, a great place to learn music. I played a lot of rock and roll music. That's what I was into. But then getting ready, you know, started playing freshman year in high school. I started playing cello. So it was very difficult for me getting ready for college. And then getting into college, it didn't matter that I could play by ear. It didn't matter that I wrote songs and wrote lyrics. It didn't matter all of my contemporary American pop knowledge. I used it in one semester in my contemporary American pop class. Everything else was classical music. So of course, when we go back into the classroom as new teachers, we're going to teach what we were taught. And then, you know, all of that is amazing and it's wonderful. I love Beethoven, but it's very telling what we leave out when we're choosing music. Not to mention that all of the American traditions of music were created by Black people. So we're thinking about blues, we're thinking about jazz, we're thinking about rock and roll, we're thinking about hip hop. And then the fact that that is so excluded from our higher ed education is I think a big missing piece in our education. For example, I didn't get a scholarship because I wasn't good enough at cello, but if I could have somehow auditioned in songwriting and maybe a little bit of cello and maybe playing on the 5 other instruments that I knew how to play, none of them good enough to audition. But I think we need to do a better job on the collegiate level of making things more accessible for different kinds of music making. And we are talking about human values. How about we talk about music values and saying, trying to eliminate this hierarchy of music. For example, I'll give a shout out to my friend Miles. I know he's watching right now. We went to Chicago Symphony Center to see a CSO play, got into a conversation with someone. He had mentioned that he teaches a hip hop class. And the comment was, well, is hip hop really deep enough to teach in a whole year's worth? And we can look at classical music. We can look at a Bach fugue and talk about how harmonically, rhythmically, and melodically complex it is. And that's a European value of music. But then we can look at hip hop, and for a minute, let's put aside the incredibly complex lyrical aspect of hip hop music and just look at the musical. It's a complexity in terms of layers, in terms of texture, right? We hear one snare, but there's really 15 different snare sounds under that, and the synth and all of these percussion elements and all of these samples from different eras of music. It's really a rich tapestry of music. And when we're not bringing that into the classroom, we're unconsciously saying that is not valuable. So that's why I want to put the pressure on the teachers of have awareness of yourself. What are you missing from your education or your upbringing? And then taking that and having awareness of your students. How am I being aware of my students' culture, and what part of their culture am I not including in the classroom and in the curriculum? And then making decisions about what music I need to learn about, and then bring that so that I'm making sure to celebrate every culture represented in that class. Even if I teach at 100% white classroom, I still need to do that work so that they are also exposed to that. I think that is something that is very important. And then also giving the opportunity for students to bring in a song, like, okay, everyone, this month you're all going to bring in what do you think is the best song ever written and why? And then give the students the opportunity to lecture on that one song and that artist. When were they born? What is their contribution to music? What, you know, talk to me about melody, give them a list, talk to me about all these different elements of that song. That way you're making, again, like Scott said, you're making the student the expert there. I think that is very important to show students something important right now, which is that they matter. Right now, we're seeing political upheaval in this country. We're seeing a lot of protests in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. We're having all these discussions about Black Lives Matter. And I know those are intense topics and we want to maybe keep the innocence of our children, but we have to talk to them about this real world stuff sooner rather than later, because if we wait till they're ready to graduate high school, that might be too late. And if we are trusting them that they are mature enough to handle this subject matter, then we're saying something else. You matter, you can handle this. And we're teaching them how to engage music in a critical way, so they're not just listening to music that might have a negative message. What are they saying in that song? You know, does it have substance? Or how about this song? Why did I not learn about Nina Simone until I saw the documentary, What Happened, Miss Simone, on Netflix? Why did I make it through my entire college career as a undergrad for music education without learning about her contributions to the civil rights movement? How come it took me so long to hear the song "To Be Young, Gifted, and Black" by Nina Simone? I should have been learning that in college, and I make sure not a year goes by before I teach that to my students, because it's one thing to say Black Lives Matter or wear a t-shirt. It's quite another thing to say, we're going to learn about Sam Cooke today. We're going to learn about Nina Simone today. And we're going to talk about all of these people and their contributions that they made. And I think the last thing I want to say about this subject, and I'm going to quote Bettina Love in her book, We Want to Do More Than Just Survive, Abolitionist Teaching, and how we can teach our students in these struggling schools, not just to survive, but to thrive. And that definitely counts in the music classroom. And she says that all pedagogy, regardless of its name, must be rooted in challenging systematic oppression with intersectional social justice. So again, bringing it back to SEL in the music classroom, it's about social awareness. How do I matter? It is about awareness. Who are these people that are struggling and hurting in the real world? And how can we use music to help them? And at the same time, how do we make better decisions about what music we listen to? How do we critique that music? How do we write music? And what passion do we put into the music that we're writing? And all of that in service of social justice. And I think if we trust our students with those topics, they will surprise us as they've surprised me in my classroom. So thank you so much.
Right here, Javier, thank you for that. That was a gift to all of us. Thank you. Stumbling over words for a reason, my friend. Thank you. You know, I think for a lot of us, you started off our time today talking about Mr. Rogers, and Mr. Rogers was expert at taking these huge issues and finding a way to make it developmentally appropriate for our youngest audiences. In 1969, he took a stance on racism, but he didn't sit down and have a conversation about racism. He did so by putting his feet in a kiddie pool with an African-American man. And that was his way of having that conversation. And I think, as you so eloquently put, Javier, is that music can be that same portal for us, is that music can be that entry point for us to be able to have those conversations with our students. And trust me, that gives us a leg up in our classroom. That gives us a special position in our music classrooms. So thank you for that. Anyone else on the panel want to, Uriel, it's all you.
I just got one quick point to the issue of youth empowerment, which is actually one of the final and most important pieces of any culturally relevant teaching. One of the things, so I've been blessed to get to do a lot of professional development with teachers. And one of the things I always say is when I observe a classroom, I expect that I can walk in and ask any student in the class what they're learning, why it's important, and how they'll benefit personally from the application of whatever skill they're learning. And I think if we as music educators hold ourselves to that standard, that literally a student can answer that question, then you automatically are getting to the issue of what's in it for them and having them understand it and have ideally played a role in sort of developing it, but certainly be able to articulate, you know, what the benefit is. And I think that causes us to also go backward and go back to what was the reason that we got into educating in the first place. It wasn't to create musicians. It wasn't to create the next symphonic member. Maybe for some it is. Never was that for me. I could care less if these kids want to drum next year or not. What I care about is that they understand community leadership and discipline and how that can work for them in an applied way. And they've understood what the process is to develop those skills and to utilize them in any context that they choose. So I think one litmus test for that also is to charge ourselves to be able to literally have our students be able to have someone walk in and answer those questions. So I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Powerful. We have a question that just came in, and I know, Lori, we said we were going to save them from the end, but I want to go here now because I think this is an important one, and we're kind of in this groove right now. Maria asks, how do we bring diverse music into schools that are not culturally diverse? And I know that many of us kind of fit into that world. So are there any thoughts that we have from the panel who can help us out here?
Scott, if you don't mind, I'll jump in.
Take it, Mike.
My school is, 5-6 building, and we are, gosh, I don't know, 98% Caucasian and a little bit of everything else. It's about finding connections. Why was it, I mean, Javier just said it, why was it that I had to watch Echoes in the Canyon to find out that the Beach Boys were inspired by Bach? Bach's great. Why can't I go to him through an art form that maybe I want to go through? It doesn't matter. Connect what kids connect to. Empower them through what they are. So instead of the dances, TikTok dances. Why does the TikTok dance have to be a negative thing in the classroom? That's a culturally power move for students that you can bring into the music classroom that kids connect to. And if you're willing to connect with them on that, man, boom, you don't have to work to connect with them on that. They're already connected. If you can find that piece and make the connection for them, because sometimes that's hard. Sometimes we're asking really young kids to make really sophisticated connections. So finding that diverse music and finding a way to make that connection so they can make that step to it and give them that scaffold to make that connection. For our younger students, we can get right there. They're probably already listening to the music. We're probably the ones who are not. They're probably already experiencing it. We just haven't experienced it yet. My kids can turn on Pandora at home. I've got a 13-year-old and twin 10-year-olds, and they were like, turn on Happier Radio, Dad. And I was like, what? Okay, I'll turn that on. They knew every song that was on it. I'm the one who didn't know any of the songs on it because I'm still listening to America Radio and every hit from the 70s, 80s, and 90s today. They're already listening to it. So I think we just have to be brave as adults to take the step forward to do it. Sometimes it's really hard to be brave and put ourselves out there, like you said, for fear of, am I going to put my foot into something here that I don't want to? Or is my administrator going to come down the hall and do that? And from the administrative perspective, I can tell you, just give me a heads up. I got your back. Like we can just give me a heads up that this is going to go. If I'm going to get a phone call on it, tell me how to support you. Why are you doing it? Why is it important to kids? What is going to motivate them to make a connection to their community through this? Help empower me to be able to support you, because a lot of administrators don't have the background that I do. So they might not be able to do that. They might not have the skills to go and do that.
So, Mike, I think every teacher here says, we want you as our principal. And I want to come back to this to see if anyone else has something to add to Maria's question. But, I think this is a good transition point for us to start to talk to you, Mike, a little bit about advocacy. And we know that the arts and music are going to be undergoing some tests, some trials and some tribulations, and showing our worth. And many of us are starting to wrap our heads around a redefinition, a paradigm shift, if you will, about what music education looks like. When this fall, concerts probably not going to happen. Well, how can you show me that music education still has value when that's not front and center? So can you talk to us a little bit as a musician administrator about what's going through your head when you're looking at this? And you're seeing the news stories, you're seeing what other school districts are doing. How's this at play in your mind?
It's really hard for me. We have about 250 sixth grade students. We have a band that's usually around 125 students. We have a orchestra, sixth grade orchestra that's around 40 to 50 students every year, and a choir that's around 110, 120-ish students. I mean, we've got just about every kid participating in some form of musical art, plus also looking at it through general music. We also have general music 5, 6. So sixth graders are getting a double dose if they decide to sign up and that's their passion, which is awesome. What we're doing is we're really looking at, from an instrumentalist perspective, how can we not frustrate students? And that was one of my band and orchestra teachers first, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to connect? And I can't sit in front of you and move your reed 1/4 of an inch up so you can make a sound and not a honk. Well, a honk is a sound, but not the sound that we would prefer. So how can I adjust their reed if I'm not sitting in front of them? So what we're really looking at for our program that we're looking at is changing to that connection piece in the beginning. So we're going to have you sign up. We're going to do drive-through fittings. We're going to do all of those things, but we might just leave the instrument put away for a little bit, and we're going to start studying some different forms of music, and then start to identifying, hey, you know what? We got to learn basic rhythm as sixth grade band, choir, orchestra students, as general music students. Let's learn some complex rhythm patterns through some of this music we can study. So that way, when we are able to come together, all right, we've got a base. Everybody has this rhythm knowledge base now that we can go for. When we look at the notation, I might not be able to teach you that, but I could get you to sing the scale. So when we come back together and I start teaching it to you, I'm a big proponent. I don't have perfect pitch, but I can remember the starting pitch for just about every song my quartet sings. Why? Because I have the mental memory of it. So if I can teach you the notation and get you to sing the notes, then when we get together, I'm one step further on. Now all I've got to do is get the brain and the fingers to work together and get the embouchure to work together. So there's some of those things. If you don't have an administrator who has the musical background, set them up for success. I blow the minds of sixth grade students when I walk into a band class because Mrs. McCammon's absent today, and I go, all right, put your flute together. Oh, your embouchure is nowhere near. You are not blowing enough air. And for me to be able to know those words and do that, they're like, their little mind is blown. Or when I walk into a percussion room and go, I can count to 4. Come on, we're going to do this. Like, get your bell kit out. Let's go. So, but that blows their minds when their principal can walk in and do that. If you teach general music, when I was a teacher, if I taught math and social studies, but if you walked into my room, unless it was a formal observation, let me put that out there for all of you, you are going to be put to work. Like, you're a member of our community now. You're in our room. So you're going to be involved in the conversation. I'm going to invite you in, and I'm going to make it's an open and safe environment. Invite your principal in, get them into that Google Classroom or the Google Hangout or the Google Meet and say, hey, this is the music we're listening to today. Or I think maybe it was Javier who said, all the kids have picked their number 1 song. Invite the principal in to what's your favorite song and explain why. And then stay in the room to listen. Be a part of the community. I mean, we're all in this for relationships. At least that's my, like, I'm an educator because I'm into relationships. That's my thing. So I want to have relationships too. So if I can't be in the school outside at recess playing Foursquare, I got to get into your general music class to get to know these kids. Like, there's got to be some way for me to get to know them. So connect with your administrator and invite them in. You'll probably be shocked that they're willing to. They just need a safe place to take that risk on because they're probably having it too. It was Bobby who said, and I wrote this down just because it was a big one for me this fall. It was 2 years ago, our band people came to me, and I have a fantastic staff. They're in it for people and relationships. And they came to me in December and they said, we always do this December concert. We don't want to do it. Okay, like, well, why don't you want to do the December concert? well, they're sixth graders. They know like 3 notes. All we're going to do is play through the scale. We're going to play Jingle Bells, and then it's going to be out. We're looking at like a 15, 20-minute concert. Can we do a concert in February and then another one in May when they actually have some skills that we can be proud to demonstrate? Yes. What? Why would you say no to that? It's a well thought out, like they're coming to you with that. So to like Bobby's point of like, why are we putting this pressure on ourselves? And this fall, we don't have that pressure of the next contest, the next thing for those high school and middle school ensembles. Take some time to do something that is going to really invest in the kid.
Mike, when I was a teacher, I want to have a principal come in and evaluate me and be able to talk about embouchure. Just a home run. Absolutely there. Fantastic. And, you know, I think you get at a lot of the things that we're saying in education, that we're saying in music education, that what's the first thing you need to do? Talk to an administrator. What's the second thing you need to do? Talk to your administrator. What's the third thing you need to do? Talk to your administrator. As long as you're upfront and you're coming with solutions, I think most administrators are going to listen. This also reminds me of the Chinese proverb. When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the next best time to plant a tree? Today. So if you don't have that relationship with your administrator, do it now so that you can start to have these discussions. You know, these challenges aren't going to go away. But now is the time for us to be able to make sure that we are being proactive and telling our administrators, we have a solution. Even though I can't do a concert for whatever reason, and it might be physical safety, it might be pandemic, it might be a lot of different reasons, but I got a solution. And if you go to them with solutions, they'll say yes 95% of the time. And that 5% of the time is because there's a really good reason. If you go to them with problems, the success rate, way lower. Right, Mike? Yeah. Okay. So we are winding up to our time. And one thing that I've asked the panel to do, because I think we all need a shot in the arm to go into this fall, I've asked for them to tell us their vision, their hopes, and their dreams for us this fall. So at this, to close up our time together, I'm going to hand it back over to the panel to give us the motivation that we need to start the challenges that we're going to be encountering, because this fall is not going to be easy. But if we go into it with the right mindset and with the right skill set and to think needs before notes, we can do this. Uriel, you want to kick us off?
Okay. Can you guys hear me? All right. I guess I'll just try to be as brief as I can. I'll leave you with 2 stories about 2 different students in 2 very different situations, both of whom came to the class that I was teaching them with no prior experience about what we're doing and no clue how to do it or any real reason to think they'd be any good at it. Again, that level playing field. So the first is Jonathan, who is in New York City, who probably is in his early 30s by now, because I've been at this a while. But he was a very slight kid. I had him for maybe kindergarten all the way to 8th grade. And we went on a trip once to Baltimore to perform because we were invited to do a thing at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And he told me I decided I wasn't going to go back with the kids because it just so happened my father-in-law at the time was running that organization and I was going to stay in Baltimore and send them back with a chaperone. And he looked at me as I was explaining all this to the kids, which I told him in advance. He said, "But Mr. Lashley, you're the whole fun." And in that moment, it was such a powerful reinforcement of the importance of the relationship. You know, as I think Mike was saying, you know, that's why we do this, right? For those connection relationships. I said like 3,800 kids. Every time I lose a kid, it kills me. Every time they move to a different school and I think I won't see them anymore, I can barely take it. So then and he was one of the leaders in the group and struggled mightily with behavior and feeling like he was not expected to succeed in lots of other academic situations. Then we'll talk about Kira, and he was African-American from Harlem. Kira is white from Madison, Wisconsin, probably is in high school now. She knew nothing about drumming, and the kids I had at this particular school, I'd been training a long time and working with them, and they could play and perform a lot of West African traditional stuff by themselves, and I wouldn't have to show up. So one time they played for a thing we had called Read Your Heart Out, where African-American parents would come to school and read stories to children in all the different classrooms. And my group would play like a reception performance for them before they served them all a thank you lunch. And so they did this in my absence. And I showed up later that day for their usual drum class at the end of the school day. And she came up to me in tears, livid, saying that through some miscommunication, I guess all the kids had, it was about 40 of them that were playing in a group that year. I was teaching 40 kids alone by myself, which is a whole other thing we can talk about. But, and she said that 5 or 6 of them had to put all the drums away for all 40 kids because there was some miscommunication over who was supposed to go to lunch when and yada, yada. And so, and she looked at me and she said, and that's not the community that we practice in drum power. And I wanted to cry tears of joy because she'd shown me that these social emotional learning tenets or core values or human values of certainly of community was something that she had now owned as her own and was upset to see when they weren't adhered to in the way that she thought they should be practiced. So I'll leave you with those 2 stories just as exemplars of ideally what it can look like when students pay this kind of work forward. Thank you.
Exemplars of the differences we can make. Thank you, Urel. Mike, can you send us off?
Yeah, I just had the chance, if you haven't had a chance yet, to see Michael Bonner speak. There's some stuff on YouTube. He is fantastic. One of the quotes he left us with that just like hit home with me as we start this fall was, you can't demand a withdrawal from someone you've never made a deposit in. So make lots of deposits this fall, whether that's through email, virtual Google Hangouts, cards home to families. My kids were amazed when their teacher sent them something in the mail. Send something in the mail to your kid. Let them open a mailbox for the first time and find something for them. So make lots of deposits this fall. To my friends on the panel, the core sings the song For Good. Thank you so much for inviting me. I know that I've definitely been changed for the better and changed for good tonight. Thank you.
Mike, thank you. Social capital, it's powerful. I remember when you were at Lake Forest College and we had a moment with that song. So thank you for bringing that up. Elise, send us off, please.
I am a firm believer that we are never going back, that everything we do helps us to move forward. And so as I said earlier, this fall is going to make us all adaptive teachers. And I hope as we do that, we take the time to remember what this has taught us and changing the process of how we can continue to meet the needs of all of our students as we move into either hybrid models, whatever the models may look like, but most importantly, that our students can recognize that our situation is not the same as theirs. Some of them are going to be thriving in this time, especially for my students who don't love socialization and being in person with other people. This is their jam. So taking those differences, recognizing them, appreciating them, and don't be afraid to be vulnerable. That is going to build the true connection. This is a hard time, and hearing that, your students are going to appreciate that and recognize that. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable.
Vulnerability, 100%. Absolutely. Bobby, send us off, please.
Yeah, I keep coming back to, it is so easy to dwell on how hard this is, to be having to reinvent how we teach. But I think everybody that's joined us tonight, you are putting in the effort to learn and grow. And that's what we need to keep doing, like keep on figuring out ways to connect and build that social capital and keep on finding ways to adapt and give ourselves grace to know that we're trying and we're not always going to succeed, but we just keep trying, right? And that's what we can do.
Focus on what we can do, not what we can't. We've been focusing on what we can't do for so long. It's time for us to figure out what we can do. Thank you for that. Javier, send us off.
At the end of the day, all of us want to matter. And I think that one of the most powerful things we can do this fall and beyond is to help students remember that they matter, and especially that they matter to us, regardless of their skin color, their ability, their gender, their sexual orientation, gender identity, any of these things, that they matter. And I think the way we can do that, and the way I've been doing it for the last few years, is to give them a daily expression of care. So I'm going to share with you what Mr. Rogers taught me and what I say to my students as they're leaving class every single day. You've made this an amazing day just by you being you. There's no one like you in the whole world, and I like you just the way you are.
And with that, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Please, please, please join me in thanking Gurel, Mike, Elise, Bobby, and Javier for just giving us all of this wisdom and this inspiration. You know, I think oftentimes we start to think about SEL as a box that we need to check, that this is something that we need to put on a lesson plan. The conversation that you heard today is what social and emotional learning is. This is at the heart of what we're doing, in the heart of teaching music. With that, I'll throw things back off to Lori, and thank you again to ILMEA for giving us the opportunity to speak to this great group.
No, it's us that owes the thanks to you and the panelists. And I think the way you all ended it was exactly what we all needed to hear. And I think for a lot of us, this is just going to be a starting point. Where it's going to inspire us and encourage us to look for ways to bring this into teaching, but also continue deepening our learning and understanding, and how SEL and music education are so intrinsically tied together. So just as one last reminder, we recorded it, we're going to post it. I hope that you all will share it with your colleagues, whether or not they're in music education. I think this is going to be a valuable thing for lots of people in lots of areas of education. So if you have any questions, you all should have my email from earlier today, but otherwise, I think it's good night.
Thank you, everyone. Be well. Onward to the fall.